Hi everyone, it's Jennifer here, your friend and teacher with a new lesson for you. Here I present to you lesson number 65. Take a look at these pictures. In the first one you can see a few pieces of fruit set out on a plate. Do you know the name of this fruit? If you've never seen it before, it's called a date. Most dates in the world are grown in northern Africa and in areas of the Middle East. But they're also grown in Pakistan and India and in parts of Mexico and in the U.S. state of California. The dates in this picture are on a copper Middle Eastern style plate with a matching lid and an oil lamp. Have you ever tasted a date? Later I will talk more about this sweet and sticky kind of fruit that grows on a palm tree, specifically the date palm, the tree that's seen in the picture here on the right-hand side. First, let's sing the new song we've been learning, A Grain of Wheat. Wheat grows from seeds, and so do dates. We all sang the chorus together last time. Today I've included all the words that are about Jesus in the 3 verses. And to remind you, the chorus is, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground, unless a grain of wheat dies to the world around, its shell will not be broken, or its heart reach for the sun. Roots won't grow deep into the earth. The seed will never become all that it is, all that it is. So get ready. Here comes the first verse.
He left his home, family, friends, a livelihood undone. He listened to a call within and took a path that none had taken before him. He said life was different to what we had known. He took the message of God's love and he really brought it home. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground, unless a grain of wheat dies to the world around, its shell will not be broken, or its heart reach for the sun. Roots won't go deep into the earth, the seed will never become all that it is. All that it is, all that it is. All that it is. He spoke as if God's living touch was right within his heart. His hands reach out to heal with love. This was just the start of a new world revival. He said we'd do greater than what he had done. He let the Spirit's power unfold and he grew into God's Son. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground, unless a grain of wheat dies to the world around, its shell will not be broken, or its heart reach for the sun. Roots won't grow deep into the earth, the seed will never become all that it is. All that it is, all that it is. All that it is. He scared us with a love so bold, we nailed him to a tree. And as he let his body break, it was clear to see God flowing through him. He said this could happen for all who believed. A life empowered by love and truth is waiting as a applies to the world around. Its shell will not be broken, or its heart reach for the sun. Roots won't go deep into the earth, the seed will never become all that it is. All that it is, all that it is. All that it is, all that it is.
Through the various parables of Jesus that we've looked at over the last few weeks, we've learned a lot about seeds and about God's kingdom. Why did Jesus use parables? Well, there are two main reasons. In the first place, Jesus wants to reveal the truth to those who want to know it. And secondly, he wants to conceal or hide the truth from those who really aren't interested. In the parable of the sower, there are 4 kinds of soil. The first one, shown in the first box of this illustration, was the rocky ground, in which the seed could not grow roots down into the shallow soil, and soon the seed was dried up by the hot sun and withered away. The second was the soil on the pathway, where the ground was hard and the seed couldn't grow into the packed earth, and soon it was eaten by birds who could easily see it. The third was the thorny ground, and after the seed had sprouted and started to grow, the plant got tangled up and choked by the faster growing thorn bushes. The fourth was the good soil, where the seed sprouted, grew, and developed well, and produced seeds of wheat for a good crop. In the parable of the wheat and the tares, we learn that the plants look so much alike that it's hard to tell them apart. The farmer knows that if the workers try to pull up the tares, then some of the wheat will be destroyed because the roots are tangled together. The farmer only wants the wheat, of course, but has enough patience to wait. Wait until the time of harvest, when the wheat can be identified and the poisonous tares can be separated from the wheat and then burned. This art I showed you when we talked about the parable of the mustard seed. In the magazine where it was published, the Canadian artist James Patterson commented in these words. He says, "I imagine Jesus stroking his chin, looking up at the sky above the crowds of people," this is in Matthew, and saying to himself, how am I going to explain to them where I came from? Where is God's dwelling place? Heaven. What do I do? And then he comes up with an image of something small that becomes big, something that provides shelter and rest for many. The artist continues, "I've tried to apply this same sense of whimsy and poetry to my painting by showing birds of many shapes and sizes, many colors, inhabiting a safe and pleasant place together." As I said, when I talked about the parable, we can see that it's a parable of inclusion. Now in this picture, seeds are on the upper left and a flower on the lower right. In the other 2 photos, you can see sprouting plants. The one at the top right is in good soil with adequate water, and the other seed on the bottom left has managed to grow in a difficult spot. Perhaps it's a broken sidewalk or maybe a broken up parking lot. We've recently talked about many kinds of seeds and many types of plants, but we haven't yet talked about the reason for a flower, have we? I've got a book with that very title, written and illustrated by Ruth Heller and published by Scholastic Press. After reading it to you, and after you've learned the reason for a flower, then I think you'll all know enough about botany. Remember, that's the scientific study of plants, for you to be able to understand a special story from Israel that I want to tell you later in this lesson. Do you suppose it's a story about dates? Here we go. On the first page, on this first page, I see flowers. There's also some bees and some butterflies. Oh, here's the opposite page where the author has written birds and bees. What do you see on this page? She has written, and these. On both pages, I see several butterflies. Here's some arrows to show you. And I see a bird, a grasshopper, a beetle. I see an animal. I think it's a fox, with a long nose. And there's even a bumblebee on the right-hand side page, down at the bottom, hiding. Now it's nighttime. And these sip nectar from the flowers. Well, I see a couple of moths and bats. Bats come out at night. That's what they like, is the nighttime. Oh, on this page I see a lot of bumblebees. And these, as they search for more pollen from the flower before, goes to the next one they explore. Oh, I see a mouse climbing on a stem of grass. Some pollen travels in the breeze without the help of birds or bees, and very often makes you sneeze. I think those yellow marks on these pages are showing the pollen moving through the air. I wondered at first if they were fingerprints or smudges on the paper of my book, but they're pollen, which is often yellow or orange, but not always. From an anther on a stamen to a stigma on a style, pollen grains must travel and stay a little while. And then you'll see the reason. I'll now interrupt this book reading briefly to bring you some illustrations of flower parts. This picture from Scientific American shows the parts after it's been pulled apart. You can see the stem, the leaf, the flower, and the flower is made up of the petals, a stamen, and a stigma. In the storybook, it showed that the anther on which is the stamen, on the anther which is on the stamen, and the pollen must go from the stamen to the stigma part of the plant in order to germinate. The stigma and style part are part of the pistil, as shown in this other botanical drawing with lines drawn to show the names of each part. Pollination happens if the pollen goes from the anthers on the stamen to the stigma on the same flower, or in some cases on another one. As it says here, many flowers have male parts and female parts. Other types of flowers may only have male parts or only female parts. Depending on the species, the two parts needed for pollination may be on different plants. Now, let's go back to our book. where I just read part of a sentence. Let me say it again. And then you'll see the reason. And now I can say, for each flower, even weeds. Do you recognize some of these flowers? I see a chrysanthemum, a lily, zinnia, pansy, petunia, a daisy, a rose, hydrangea, and several others. The book continues below the dandelion, the only weed that they show. It says, the reason for a flower is to manufacture seeds that have a cover of one kind or another. Some grow inside a juicy fruit, and it's not odd to find them growing in a pod. Yes, we looked at some of these in our earlier lessons. For example, a tomato, an apple, and green peas, all in a pod. I also see a watermelon, an avocado, a pomegranate, and a green pepper. I don't know what all of these on this page are, but I do see at the top the seeds of a maple tree. They look like green wings, don't they? And they do flutter like wings when they come off of the maple tree. They flutter to a new spot to make new maple trees. I also see some beans, a peanut, an acorn, an almond, and as the author says, the largest ones, a coconut. There's more interesting stuff in this book, and I promise to finish it on in our next lesson, which will be in 2 weeks on Thanksgiving weekend. Watch for it on Sunday, October 10th. Now we've read about seeds, and I think you now know enough for me to be able to tell you my story that's from Israel. Israel is located on the west side of the Dead Sea, while on the east side, opposite Israel, is the country of Jordan. The blue arrow points to where the city of Jerusalem is located, a city that is prominent in the Bible stories. This red arrow points to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, and this green arrow points to the Jordan River in the north, where Jesus was baptized by John. This purple arrow points to a place called Masada. You may never have heard of it, but it's where this story begins. Masada is an ancient fort. It's located 1,300 feet or 400 meters above the Dead Sea on a large isolated rock plateau, something that Americans probably would call a mesa because of its flatness. King Herod of Judea built a winter palace there for himself more than 2,000 years ago, just before Jesus was born. Here's what the place looks like. In this view from above, you can see some of the buildings that Herod built. If you look closely, the Dead Sea is visible at the top of the picture. Nowadays, as an Israeli national park and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the 840-acre complex holds well-preserved ruins attesting to the history of the ancient kingdom of Israel. Herod made it a safer place to hide in case of invasion by his Roman enemies by building a protective stone wall on one side and including cisterns for collecting water and building large storerooms to keep food supplies. And I understand they also found weapons there later. Here's another photo of Masada. This photo was taken from higher up, and you can see the cliffs and the surrounding desert with lots of white showing, chalk and dolomite mineral deposits. The surrounding area is virtually uninhabited and undeveloped. The Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 7 70 AD. Masada was abandoned around that time, but that's a story of its own. And then Masada was abandoned, and for many centuries, really, people didn't know there were buildings up there. Finally, it was rediscovered in the 19th century, and in 1828, someone managed to climb up there, told others about it, and researchers also climbed a difficult climb and mapped it. You can see how difficult the climb would be, although on the right with this orange arrow you can see there is a roadway going up, kind of meandering up the side of the mountain. Archaeologists came to study this place and eventually excavated the fortress and the palace, a Jewish temple, and many other buildings. Have you ever heard the expression to make a long story short? The phrase is used when someone is explaining what happened in the past by using fewer words and without giving all the details. It means I'm leaving out some things in order to focus on the gist of the story. It took many years of more exploring and more digging. During the 1960s, they were able to find the storerooms. And the storerooms were found by the archaeologist, and they had discovered that he had built 29 of them. They were long rooms. Of course, here over time they have no roofs on them, but they probably originally had some roofs. But that's pretty much what it would look like if you were to travel there. One of the foods that Herod and the others enjoyed in Israel at that time were dates. In particular, they enjoyed the Judean date. It was such an important export from ancient Judea that they were depicted on coins and came to symbolize Judea. Writing in the 1st century, Josephus, the Jewish historian, said that kilometers and kilometers of hand-cultivated date forest stretched from the Sea of Galilee all the way to the Dead Sea. Over the centuries, the Judean palm tree was decimated by war, and the final blow came about 800 years ago when Crusaders destroyed the last remaining trees, making this particular plant extinct. In the 20th century, there were no more of these particular trees left growing anywhere. At Masada, archaeologists found several seeds from this extinct date palm tree in an ancient clay jar, one of the few jars that hadn't gotten broken over the time. Radiocarbon dating done by the University of Zurich in Switzerland confirmed that the seeds dated from between 155 years before Christ to about 64 AD. They are about 2.5 centimeters long, and as you can see, they are skinny. These seeds were cataloged and filed away from the 1960s for over 40 years until some Israeli botanists had an idea. So, on January the 29th, 2005, on the Jewish New Year of Trees, which is an honor celebrated for all Jewish trees, scientists took extra care and soaked some of these seeds from Masada in water and prepared an especially nutritious soil mix to use. This is not the actual seed found at Masada. It's just an example to show how one would look if it had germinated. Well, the scientists didn't know if a 2,000-year-old seed would grow or not. I imagine that they said a little prayer before planting the seeds, and guess what? One of them sprouted. One of them sprouted and then it grew. And this is a recent picture of it. A live date palm that was grown from a seed that was about 2,000 years old. That's an amazing story, isn't it? Let me tell you that the tree was named by the scientists. They named it Methuselah. That's in honor of the oldest person mentioned in the Bible, the grandfather of Noah. And it's also true that Methuselah is a male tree. Here's the tree in a picture taken around 2008 when the plant was about 3 years old. It was doing very well. At that time, it was the only Judean date palm alive and living in the world. Well, this time I've sent you 5 pages of familiar flowers to make colorful. They're in your email attachment. And as for whether Methuselah is still alone in the world, come back in 2 weeks for the next lesson, where I'll not only finish the story, The Reason for a Flower, but I'll tell you if there's another chapter since 2005, a chapter about the ancient date palm story. So come back in 2 weeks. God bless.